Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. I just thought I'd do a little muse because I was thinking to myself, as I often do, why do I believe what I believe? Why do I believe anything? Whether it be some kind of political position, whether it be um, an evaluation on a human being, another human being, so maybe some celebrity or some famous person, or again, some politician. Why do I feel that way about them? What are the things that are operating behind the scenes that are non-conscious? What are the biases that are at play? And when I think about one of the core subjects, belief in God or lack of belief in God. So I do not believe in God. I see myself as a strong atheist. So someone who says I do not believe in the existence of God, rather than I lack a belief that God exists. I do not believe. I don't want to derail this to talk about strong atheism versus weak atheism or positive versus negative atheism. Very briefly, strong atheism is the position that you adhere to a proposition that God does not exist. So it's like a belief. And weak atheism says, I just lack a belief in God. And I think many people try and claim that they're weak atheists or the latter type of atheist because to they don't like to take on this idea that they have a belief. It's a bit too much like religion. I'd say load of rubbish. Like if you just lack a belief, you wouldn't be arguing about it on the internet all day long. You wouldn't be like keyboard warrioring because that shows that you have a very strong belief that God does not exist. You are arguing with other people that God doesn't exist, therefore you are a strong atheist. Anyway, that's a different debate. It's just a definition of terms, always useful in philosophy. So I wonder why I don't believe in God. And again, I, I guess you need to rewind to find out when you first changed your belief or when you first adopted that belief. Because arguably everything since then has been just post hoc rationalization. You're just right. I've taken on that belief. Now I'm just going to defend that belief with all the arguments I can find. But they aren't necessarily the arguments that made you believe in the first place, the arguments that drive your belief. So when I think back to when I deconverted from Christianity, and I've said this many times before, I was a very bizarre form of Christian because it was when I was 17 years old. I pray to God at night for comfort and ask for stuff, as a kind of like mate. All right, God, oh, you can do this for me, that kind of stuff. Um, and I was confirmed in chapel at the school I was at, but like my understanding of the Holy Trinity was completely nuts. My understanding of atonement was just incoherent. Like it was nothing. So I had a really bastardized version of Christianity that makes me wonder now whether I could have really been called a Christian. I mean, yes, but like man, my understanding of the core tenets of Christianity was completely wrong. And you can start debating about what is true Christianity, who gets to define who is a Christian and who isn't, and is there some kind of core criteria you need to believe in. So if you believe in Jesus Christ, well, I don't even think at that age I quite understood who Jesus was. Like I didn't understand that Jesus was literally God incarnate on earth. In that very important sense. A lot of Christians, I don't think still do because you're taught God the Father, God the Son, and you think there's some kind of sonness to Jesus, that actually God the Father is like the main God. This is like completely wrong understanding of the Holy Trinity and the Godhead, which is incoherent. So there's no no wonder there's misunderstanding there. But anyway, so as I rewind back in time, like what made me get out of that belief system and say, oh, do you know what? God doesn't exist. And I stopped wearing my crucifix and just kind of sort of, I don't know if it's like, right, definitely at this point, God doesn't exist, whether it's just a drifting away as a kid who was interested in girls and beer and music and stuff like that. And God just was less important as an idea. But I think it's probably going to be the problem of evil that was a main one, and that is for a lot of people. That's like this idea that God exists, and I look around the world and there's all this evil and suffering. Like it just doesn't jive. So I think that was the main probably argument, if you like, And after that, it all sort of fell apart. So I guess there is a really important moral dimension to that. What I want to do now, what I'm trying to do in this kind of rambling stream of consciousness, is understand what has primacy in my mind and in the sense of who I am, and whether that is driving my disbelief in God, that I can hang all these other post hoc rationalizations on as well, which do also, like, they're not just like, I don't believe in God and, oh, there's a bunch of other arguments that I can just quickly wheel in. Actually, those arguments are really strong for me as well, and they are knocking further nails into the coffin, so that they are important components of my disbelief now, especially involved in philosophy. And I look at the whole array of arguments, and they are just so much more persuasive for atheism than for theism. But again, the question is, are they more persuasive because you've already adopted this position and you're just going through a whole bunch of confirmation bias? And it's difficult to know exactly. It really is difficult to know oneself. And anyone really, because of this thing called doxastic voluntarism or doxastic involuntarism, which is the idea that you can't choose to believe something. You just end up believing it because your non-conscious brain gets you to that point. So if I told you, the viewer here, to say, oh, the moon is made of cheese, you need to believe the moon is made of cheese. It's not like you can go, okay, I believe the moon is made of cheese now, and you can just switch your mind voluntarily. That's doxastic voluntarism. So we actually have doxastic involuntarism, which means to say that when our non-conscious brain recognizes we get to a certain point or of evidence, of argument, of motivated reasoning, you get to this certain point, your brain goes, right, I believe that now. So, I've got to a point in my life where I believe the sun will rise tomorrow, or the earth will rotate such that the sun will appear to rise. Great. Well, like, I can't tell you exactly what the pieces of I probably could, like, go through a belabored, like, investigation there, but really that's my non-conscious brain doing a whole bunch of work. So when it comes to exactly why I believe why I believe atheism is the correct worldview now, what are the exact arguments that have got me over that line? I don't know, because it's actually my non-conscious brain that's indicating to me that I don't believe. Like, I can't suddenly go right now with all that I know and all that I've been and all my experiences. I can't suddenly go, do you know what? I don't believe in God now, because that that kind of thing is a result of non-conscious machinations. But are there core drivers? Is there motivated reasoning going on with me? I always accuse other people of motivated reasoning. In my book, Resurrection of Critical Analysis, I talk about how people like William Lane Craig and other sort of theistic believers will adhere to the belief that the resurrection is true because they need it to be true, because otherwise their kind of business empire will fall apart, or their belief in God and all their associated you know, communities, familial connections, and all these be like, I was wrong all along, blah, blah, blah. So there's actually a really strong motivation for Christians to continue believing in the truth of, say, the historical claims of the resurrection. And one must understand that if you're trying to unpick or disabuse people of those kinds of belief, you need to understand that there's a large amount of psychology going on there. So I can't just present you with a bunch of rational arguments and expect you to change your mind, because that's not how humanity works. So for me, I will accuse other people of having motivated reasoning, but I must understand that I'm probably victim to that myself, because I'm claiming that everyone's victim to motivated reasoning. I'm not an exception. So what motivates me, if anything, towards my belief in atheism, or what continues to motivate me, or what motivates me to continue disbelieving? And is there something that has primacy? And I think, going back to this idea that the big one was a problem of evil, and that has a moral dimension, I think it's morality. So I think when I look at, and I say I think that, like, as if I'm not quite sure what I think, because I'm trying to second guess my non-conscious brain here. So I'm really not sure. but I keep talking, and recently I've been talking a lot about church shopping, how people in the United States particularly will go to a church and see that it doesn't politically jive with their own um, political position. So say, for example, you're really political, you are politically conservative, really fundamentally politically conservative, like a member of the GOP, the Republican Party, and you're really committed to that kind of politics. And remembering that politics is a form of morality, it's just morality writ large across society. So you have these political moral beliefs, and you go to your local church, and you're like, their politics aren't quite what I believe. What doesn't happen generally, as according to data, is that you stay at that church and you adapt your political beliefs to what the preacher is saying, to what the pastor is saying. You don't adapt your political beliefs um, to go in line with the theological claims of that church. Instead, you keep your political and moral beliefs and you go to a different church and you find a church that accords with your moral political beliefs, which is to suggest that your moral political beliefs are have primacy and your theological beliefs are actually secondary, which means your kind of theistic beliefs play second fiddle to your moral beliefs. Now, I'm happy to say that about, in this case, fundamentalist or, you know, liberal Christians, actually, all flavors of Christianity in America in this context, they will church shop to align the theology being presented to them to the politics that they hold much closer to their heart, although they might not admit that, and they may see their religion as being the most fundamental aspect of their lives, but it probably isn't. It is probably politics, thus morality. And that's probably the same for me. So my atheism is probably due in large part to my views of morality. And I was always I went to an all boys boarding school for co-educational, then an all boys from like 13 to 18, because my parents were in the Navy, who lived around the world. And there you can imagine the sort of people you might have there, very sort of conservative type people, traditionalists, people who would sit probably now in the modern, now they're adults on the conservative right, probably. Not everyone, but I was definitely a liberal at that age. Like I was going against the grain. I had quite a lot of empathy. I think empathy I've argued that empathy is such a core component of morality. So my ability to put myself in other people's shoes, and this sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but this is me trying to understand myself and seeing behaviors from my early childhood onwards. Like there's certain TV programs I had to watch behind a pillow because I just could, it was just too embarrassing. There's this long running TV show in the UK, an Australian soap called Neighbours, and we used to watch that at school, but I used to watch it like when there was really embarrassing scenes. I was like, no, don't do that. You can't do that. I just couldn't watch it. There's certain really embarrassing comedy things that I find difficult to watch, like things like The Office at times, like the British version of The Office with Ricky Gervais. It's just uncomfortable viewing at times where I'm like, I'm always in that room with them, and it's like I can't handle watching this. I can't handle being part of that. So I've always had this really overactive empathy that I think really underwrote my liberal moral values. I remember at school, a couple of my mates we had some Muslim students from Malaysia who had been sort of recruited into the school to get more money for school fees and whatnot. And two of my best mates were sabotaging their Ramadan meals with salt and pepper at night. And I was like, I was just, you can't do that. I was like, I may not believe in Islam and I may not be part of that culture, but I can't handle you just ruining the one meal they have a day because you see them as outsiders. And even then, like, so then I started being called, you know, an expletive for someone from Pakistan, a lover, right? And all this kind of stuff because I'd stood up for them in a moral dimension. And so when I look back on my experiences as a child in those situations, and I was thinking, right, I was a kind of outsider for some of my friends and whatnot, because I was holding a strong moral stance against what my in group was doing that then placed me outside of that in group to some extent. And that's an indicator to me that I had a strong moral compass at that age, that was a liberal moral compass, that I'd have empathy for other people, and that would drive m- my moral my moral valuations, and in turn will eventually drive my politics. I didn't really have a grasp of politics until much later in my life. I really came to politics late, to really understand the left right dimension. And even now that's incorrect, but like I didn't really understand the left right because I was at like all boys private boarding school until I was 18, and then you traveled and then uni, and I did experience other, but it was a gradual process to really get politics to click. And then when it finally clicked, I at the time I was like a sort of liberal conservative, and then I realized fairly soon that actually I was only a liberal conservative because my parents were conservatives, and I went to a school like that, and I'd come out with these kind of pseudo conservative values. But then when I started unpicking my own beliefs, I was like, no, I don't believe that at all. And I started swinging, and then I started doing politics, philosophy, and then I started swinging to the left. And uh, that was to align the politics with my inner core moral disposition, I think. You can look at work of people like David Pissarro and other political psychologists that that lead to the conclusion that, and it's also linked with your physiology even, that actually your moral valuations are pretty, they have primacy, but even they depend upon things like physiological variables, and your disgust sensitivity and all these kind of things. So when you're talking about you kind of layers of belief systems. You got your theological belief, or in my case, my atheological belief, but that will be based on my moral beliefs, and my moral beliefs aren't based on my atheology or theology. My moral beliefs are broadly based on who I am as a psychological human being, who I've become, my genes, and my upbringing from my parents and from my schools and from my peers and all that kind of developmental progress through life. But at the core, I've probably got a set of moral values that are somewhat determined by my genes that have really dictated where I've gone there. There will be some wriggle room, but I'm fairly sure that I always would have been some kind of liberal or leaning towards that way. And then you can argue, the primacy therefore is like genes and biology and all this kind of stuff. But it goes like that. And my atheology, it would be really hard. I guess here's a conclusion, if there is one here. It would be really hard for me to deconvert from atheism and to convert to theism if it didn't accord completely and utterly with my moral sensibility, because that is so foundational. And part of the reason I really struggle, or a large reason, or perhaps the most important reason I struggle with theistic belief in other people, is that I find it morally problematic. And in fact, that's the only way stuff matters. So when I've changed my mind about, like, there is sometimes I argue that truth is really what matters. Like, it's all about finding the truth. But in some sense, actually, I don't care if you believe in God, even though it's not true. I don't care if it makes you happy, but more importantly, if it has no negative moral um, aspect, or no negative moral impact on other people or on the world at large. In other words, mattering is a moral thing. And that's what's the most important metric to kind of evaluate life and everything. In other words, I evaluate belief and non-belief in terms of what it does for us morally. And I look at religion, and it's so hard to get past the moral harms that religion that are involved with so many religions. When you look at the holy books of either, Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, that the Hebrew Bible, the Christian Bible, the Quran, they are all really problematic moral guides. And I think we can do so much better, and we have done so much better in other places, in other ways. So it would be so difficult for me to become a Christian if Christianity didn't accord with my moral disposition, and it doesn't. So unless my morality changes, I would never be able to become, say, a Christian or a Muslim. It's morality first. When we look at so many things in the world, it's like we are just evaluating morally first, and that includes politically. Politics is a subset of morality. Anyway, that's a massive stream of consciousness. I hadn't prepared this at all. I just thought I'd sit down and wander through my thoughts, and here they are. They've come out of my mouth, and I've listened to them. And I've gone, yeah, I think that sounds about right. uh, so, thanks for indulging that. If you have anything to say about that, please, I'll be really interested to see what you think in the comments below. If you've actually put up with listening to my rambles. Thank you. But yeah, what do you think? Do you think, if you are a Christian or if you know Christians, are they a Christian incidentally because of where they were born and what family and what society they were born into, and that's kind of what you get as a default, but actually what's operating underneath that is their moral core, and actually they have a very active Christianity there. That's because it accords with their moral core. Some people are big on in-group, out-group separation. This is me and mine. That's you and yours, and uh, and these kind of harsh fundamentalist moral positions. And this black and white. This is right. This is wrong. My morality is far more nuanced, and but very many people have very simplistic moral codes because that's easier for them, and it's just like, right, homosexuality is wrong. You're the out group. I'm going to otherize you, and the Bible says that as well. I am against that because that's not who I am, and anyone who's not who I am is therefore wrong. And that kind of simplistic approach to morality, well, there are a lot of people that have that as a core moral persona, and therefore that kind of religiosity can attach itself very easily. Um, there are going to be people whose morality and religious belief are coextensive, and throughout their life they'll be developed layer upon layer, and that's quite maybe more difficult to tease apart. Whereas my Christian belief and my moral belief didn't work like that. It was just like I was a moral human being. Do I believe in God? Yeah, I guess I believe in God. I'm going to pray to God. But I was a moral human being first. So maybe I'm talking about my experiences, and they don't map onto everyone. And there are people who go through that coextensive relationship, uh, interaction between morality and religion. I'll have to think about that. But anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'd probably better stop talking. Thanks for all your support for the channel. Toodle pips. I'll speak to you again.